So last week we looked at a couple of Psalms, and I want to start today by just looking a little bit at one of those again, Psalm 18. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I'm saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me, and the snares of death confronted me. And in my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help, and from his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. You, O Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. With your help, I can advance against a troop. With my God, I can scale a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is flawless. He is a shield for all who take refuge in him. For who is God beside the Lord? And who is the rock except our God? It was a psalm that talked about being overwhelmed, but having confidence in our God as our rock, as our refuge, our light, and our salvation. And as I said last week, there are many psalms that say similar things. I like this one, Psalm 27, verse 5. For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. As I said, when things seem overwhelming, it can be tempting to wish that we had a God that we could pray to that would suddenly, remove us completely from all those situations, and we'd suddenly just be in a place of peace and security and everything going fine. But the thing is that we're not promised that we would be spared the wind, the rain, and the flood, but just that when it comes, we will have a foundation upon which we can stand. And there are some things that Jesus tells us about life and living that don't sort of mean that we're then exempt from the problems, but they encourage us that we're never just left at the mercy of the tempest, of the things that go on in life. That we have a salvation, that we have a rock, that we have a refuge, that we have a light. Last week I mentioned briefly the importance of a solid foundation in building lighthouses, and that I've enjoyed preaching about that in the past. And so today I want to use that as an example of some of the things. I'm sure you've probably seen this thing before. Is it going to do it again, or is it not? Let's go back. You've probably seen posters based on that particular lighthouse off the coast of France, and it's quite staggering. But the thing there is they're waves that are breaking, and the spray is going up over the top of the lighthouse. Keep that in mind. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But we're encouraged to understand that the Lord is our strength, our rock, our salvation, our stronghold. And when it comes to, the perils of life, we don't quite have the same problems in our current generation as previous generations did. Those that recently went on a cruise, I don't think were quite as worried about getting off at the other end as people 100 or 200 or 300 years ago were. I mean, in the 1800s, Lloyd's of London, which started as an insurance company to insure boats and their cargo, estimated there was one ship a day wrecked just around Britain itself. Between 1854 and 1879, 50,000 shipwrecks were registered. That's the ones that were registered. There were probably many more that never, made it to the registry, that were never to the attention of the authorities. And often large warships with crews of many hundreds or 1,000 were shipwrecked and all drowned. But the thing about the dangers of life back then and even life now was that it wasn't just in stormy and rough weather or even at night that there might be a problem. Even when all seemed calm, it might be that there was something that was a problem. You know, in a storm, one place is described like this: the position of the rock might be quite noticeable due to the waves crashing and breaking over it, or the noise of that going on. But in calm weather and at higher tides, it might be worse, because nothing soever would be visible to warn that just below the surface there lay a great danger upon which the ship could, come to grief. So even when it seemed calm, there were places that were often very, very dangerous. And one of those in particular, and some of you may have seen a documentary that talked about this particular lighthouse, there was a place off Scotland called the Bell Rock. And it was a place that was like that. Often it was just under the surface. And you would have no idea really that it was there until your ship stuck on the reef, was holed and went down. Not to mention what it might be like in some of the horrendous storms that they can have in the North Atlantic. And there was a guy whose name was Robert Stevenson, not Robert Louis Stevenson, that was a grandson of his, who wanted to build a lighthouse. And one of the reasons he wanted to do that was because he was a man of Christian faith, and he was appalled at the loss of life and at the cheapness of that life that so many seemed to place upon it. And as he said about it, the danger of this reef lay in the fact that for much of the time it was underwater. Even at low tide, its rocky spikes only protruded a little way out of the sea, and the whole area was only visible from a distance because of any white water that would lace its surface. At high tide, it vanished under 7 feet of water, leaving nothing except an occasional splash to betray its presence. It caused an enormous number of fatal shipwrecks. And there's a documentary, one of 7 wonders of the industrial world. I don't know whether you've ever seen that. One of them is devoted to that. And I got so fascinated by it, I got a book called The Lighthouse Stevensons, written about not just this guy, but about his family, ongoing descendants who got into the habit of building these amazing lighthouses. And there were many difficulties in actually building a lighthouse. It wasn't just saying, well, let's build a lighthouse, let's just go and do it. We just need to get all the stuff we need. We'll go out there and we'll build a lighthouse. It was a bit more to it. They only had a couple of hours a day that the rock was even exposed for them to work on. And of course, nothing comes cheap. And so they did. Until eventually, not long after, there was another storm, and one of the ships of the line, one of the major naval ships of the time, HMS York, was lost with all hands, over 500 people. And I don't think in the end it was sadly the cost of the lives that really maybe did it. It was the cost of the ship and then the cost of all the cargoes, perhaps, that swayed their hand. But eventually they did realise that even though there was a significant cost in building this lighthouse, there was a cost in leaving the danger to lurk there. And so they began to build, and it was amazing, the work that they put in. This guy realised that the foundation and the base were of the utmost importance, making sure that it was on a solid foundation and secured to that in a way that it would not get, wrecked by the wind and the waves. And he came up with a design so that as the waves would come against the base of it, the force of the water would be dispelled in different ways and not shift the rocks out of the way. And so they came up with some amazing plans. And they didn't, drill down and then somehow, connect and cement this to the rock. They simply created the place upon which it was going to be, and then they brought the stones and placed them there. And he had this amazing plan for all the stones. They were all intricately cut in a particular way so that they would all dovetail and interlock with one another, not just in each layer, but between the layers. And so even though, stones that weighed 10 or 20 tons on their own could be shifted by the waves in some places, no one stone could be shifted unless they were all shifted. And so the strength of this lighthouse was in this amazing design that he put together. Everything was, just amazingly planned and placed together. And the thing with the problem was that the storms didn't stop while they built the lighthouse. It wasn't that they had a few hours every day and, that was, fine. They just had to work around that. They had a few hours every day and only a few months of the year when it wasn't a terrible storm season. And the storms would often come and, undo some of the work that they did. And, they got times where they talked about, it was already 70 feet high. And unbroken waves, not waves crashing against the side and the spray going up, waves just rolling over the top of the 70-foot high. I mean, that's a pretty impressive. You've been out in some storms, have you, in your boat, looking at Rob Wall here? Nothing quite that bad. Waves regularly going over the top of the 70-foot high course of stones. And so you might say, okay, Chris, this is really fascinating, but is this a history lesson or is it a sermon? Well, I think the thing is that there are lots of lessons that we can learn from a lighthouse, from this lighthouse in particular and from lighthouses in general, for what their purpose is, for how they have been constructed. And what's pretty interesting about lighthouses, there's certainly a lot of churches that use lighthouse in their name. When I sort of just did that, I could have kept on going. There's an awful lot of churches that call themselves Lighthouse. It's still going, isn't it? It's still going, Lighthouse Church. So it's something that is symbolic, perhaps. And not symbolic just of Jesus, but of us. It's true that we've read about Jesus being our rock and our refuge and Jesus giving us light. But what's true of Jesus is meant to be true of us as his followers, Christians, little Christs, followers of Christ, to become like him. We are being made by him, if you like, into a lighthouse for others. Jesus says of himself, I am the light of the world, but then he says of us, of you are the light of the world. And he also says that, you are a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. He's clear when he talks about being a light of the world. He says no one puts a light under, an upside-down garbage can to cover it up and no one can see it, light under a bushel. No one does that. And a city on a hill cannot be hidden. It can be seen, it's visible, and it inspires those who are on a journey to that place. And we as Christians, as his followers, we've got a role in helping to guide and keep safe others in this world. And so the question is, as we live our lives and as we build this church, this congregation, this group of people, what can we do to be as effective as those who built these stone lighthouses? That's an amazing one. That's somewhere off Greece. That's a real one. I mean, you look at that and think it's been made up. It's just crazy. That's only little, but still amazing. And the thing about the dangers of life are there are many shipwrecked lives in society. And there are plenty others that are happily cruising along, heading to stormy weather. I was wondering whether I should get some of those video clips of storms on cruises, but because of some people that have been on cruises and going to go on cruises soon, thought I'm not going to show that. You don't need to be put off those things. But there are shipwrecked lives, and there are people happily cruising, not realising the stormy weather ahead. But as I said, the problem is that you can still just be sailing along thinking all is calm, not knowing that there are rocks just below the surface that might be waiting to rip the bottom out of our very beings. And so for ourselves and for the sake of those upon, amongst whom we've been placed to minister, it's important for our building to have a good foundation and base, the same as the Bell Rock, where the rock was prepared and the stones were prepared. And it began with the foundation stone, the cornerstone, you might want to call it. And how can it be a cornerstone for a round lighthouse? But as Jesus has become our cornerstone, Jesus is indeed that foundation. In 1 Peter, in Scripture it says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone. The one who trusts on him will not be put to shame." And this cornerstone, this foundation stone, it's not just the keystone that in a way helps to begin and bind the others together. It's corner in that it's significant in defining where the corner is. And then which way things will go. If you've ever read some of the things people speculate all about the pyramids, they'll go on about, very importantly, where the cornerstones were and how they were aligned and where that corner was, where the lines went. That was the alignment, the orientation of that building. And with Jesus as our cornerstone, it defines, if you like, our alignment for our entire construction of our lives and as a church. That as a church, we are aligned with the nature, the character, and the purpose of Christ. And besides him being, if you like, that foundation or cornerstone, we go on and read in Peter, "As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. You are the light of the world. You also are being built as living stones into a spiritual house." A lighthouse, if you like. And as we, like him, are living and chosen, being built into this that lasts, these interlocking stones, they took quite a while to cut out, and they were all different. I don't know that any two were actually the same as one another. I think I talked about that when I talked about Lego as an example of building. You can have lots of different bits to come together to build something. Yet they still fit together, and the strength came from that togetherness. It's amazing. But the thing about it is that, as I said, God calls us stones, not bricks. We're not another brick in the wall, all just the same size and interchangeable. We're living stones, being fashioned, selected, and positioned together. And built for a purpose. The thing about all these lighthouses, and I'll talk more about this really next week, but they're there for a purpose of shining a light. The building exists beyond just its own survival. And for us as a congregation, as a church as well, we've got to recognise that we do exist for more than just our own survival. We have a purpose. And a lighthouse stands tall. It stands tall to lift high that light that it shines. And the higher it is, the greater distance from which it can be seen. Do we, in our lives as individuals and in our lives as a church, do we lift Jesus high? Or do people have to get right up close before they can see any glimmer of Christ in us? Or are we the city on the hill that cannot be hidden? Jesus says this, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Are we building a church that shines a light that shines a light in such a way that people see our good works and it causes them to glorify our Father who is in heaven. As I said about this family, the Stevensons, a Christian faith, a strong Christian faith provoked his desire to build these lighthouses. He lived at a time when the idea of working at all on the Sabbath was not to be done, and many people were very afraid that if they did that, they would call upon themselves the ire and anger of God. And there was the problem that the quicker they got the lighthouse built, the more lives they could save. Yet did that mean working on the Sabbath? And would they or wouldn't they work on the Sabbath? And I'm pleased to say I think he understood his New Testament well enough to know that, if a donkey falls in the ditch on the Sabbath, don't you get it out, that the work of this lighthouse was the work of God, to work and do that. It's a very inspiring story, especially the book that goes into greater detail. So I want to talk next week a bit more about that. It's a bit shorter today, but if I tried to fit it all in, it would be too long in one hit. But Jesus is our rock and our refuge. He is a safe place for us to run to. But we're not just to be selfish and hold on to that for ourselves. We have a calling, we have an obligation to build and to make a safe place for others. The sad thing is that the person who wrote this book about the Lighthouse Stevensons, their family, she wrote another book called The Wreckers, about all the people that just used to actually cause problems with the lighthouses. The very early times when people would try to build lighthouses, or they actually, one guy went and put a bell on the rock, and they went and took the bell off the rock. And there was another place where, the wind through a blowhole used to make a bit of a noise to warn the sailors, and the local people went and blocked that up so that it wouldn't make any noise, so that more ships would founder and crash, because they like to get the stuff off the beach and take it home for themselves.